Welcome back everyone to an unnecessarily detailed and possibly incorrect review of the Final Fantasy series. In the previous one, we covered Final Fantasy 1, and now we are covering its sequel, Final Fantasy 2. When starting the game, Final Fantasy 2 already differs massively from 1 straight off the bat. In Final Fantasy 2, the only thing you can choose for your party is their names. Whereas if you watch the previous one, in Final Fantasy 1, you had the choice of selecting your party's names and classes. Interestingly enough, the characters are also already given names, and these aren't randomly generated ones either, implying these are the canonical names. So the names of the 4 protagonists are as follows. The first character is named Firion, who is the main character and is a childhood friend of Leon, Guy, and Maria. And then there's Maria, a childhood friend of Firion and Guy, as well as the sister to Leon. She also plays the main heroine in the story. The third party member is Guy, a friend of Firion and Maria who was raised by wild animals. Throughout the story, when you hear him speak, he sounds like a bit of a caveman, but to make up for that, he can communicate with animals. And then there's Leon, Maria's older brother. To be quite honest, there's not much I can really say about Leon at the current moment, and I even went to check the wiki, but again, it also came up quite bare. The reason there is no job system or character system was because Square intended for Final Fantasy 2 to be more story-driven than its predecessor, Final Fantasy 1. In addition to that, they also wanted to implement a system that would allow the player to grow the characters any way that the player wanted them to be, thus allowing the characters to also wield any weapon and are able to learn black or white magic. Before we get started with the story, I think it's better to delve more into the gameplay now instead of in between points of the story, or else it would ruin the flow of the video. So the first big difference in Final Fantasy 1 is the magic system. In Final Fantasy 1, I mentioned that you have an allotted amount of times you can use for each level of magic before they require you to restore their uses by either using an ether or an inn or using a cottage or tent. In Final Fantasy 2, however, it depends rather on how much MP you have instead, meaning that you can only use the magic as long as you meet its MP requirements. Additionally, you no longer learn different levels of spells. Instead, you learn the spell from its base form and will level up upon each use. This incentivizes the player to make sure that their characters use the magic where necessary, rewarding them for putting in the time to grind the spell and make sure that they use it. I personally like this because it does add a level of immersion to the game, where in Final Fantasy 1, you just buy a book and all of a sudden your mage is casting nukes, which kinda didn't make any sense, but then again, you could only access the higher level spells when your character is upgraded to either a red wizard, black wizard, or white wizard. But in 2, when you get the spell, your character will be in a sense unfamiliar with it, where in time they will continue using it, becoming more familiar, and eventually mastering the spell, increasing its effectiveness. This also gives the feeling of growth with your character, showing that even they needed time to truly learn and use something to its full effectiveness. But just a quick warning, there is a limit to how many spells you can learn. If you want to make space for a new spell, as a character can only learn a maximum of 16, you can forget one of the spells to make room for another one. But if you change your mind and want to get it back, your proficiency with that spell will go all the way back to 0 and you'll have to learn the spell again from scratch. Because you forgot it. I honestly think this could be slightly tweaked, as I feel it would have been better to start you from scratch, but the grind for relearning the spell should be much easier, as would be like relearning how to ride a bike. Because although you are rusty, you don't have to start from scratch and it will naturally all come back to you. Another one of the major differences is the leveling system. In Final Fantasy 1, you had one leveling system, which was the character's level. Whereas in Final Fantasy 2, you instead level up each of the attributes and abilities individually. The main way to do this is doing specific actions during battle that will grow that specific level, which in my opinion is pretty great. And here's why. Take for example Maria, who is a physically weak character, so obviously you don't want her to be on the front line and want her to provide support in the background. You then can teach her magic abilities, and every time she uses it, her MP increases as well as her spell level, making her grow more into the role and allowing the player more freedom. Alternatively, if you wanted her to be a brawler, no problem. You will struggle in the beginning due to her low physical stats, but eventually, she will grow. As the main way to increase your HP is to actually get hit, and of course by doing more physical attacks, your attack power increases as well. Weapons in the game have also been improved upon. They have the standard weapon types such as the swords, axes, staves, and knives. However, there is a new addition, and that is the bow. The bow in Final Fantasy is just that, a bow. However, Final Fantasy 2 has also changed its formation mechanic. You can now have characters fall to the back. Here, they receive half the damage that the characters in the front would. However, your character also inflicts half physical damage. This row is meant more for your support characters or not so physically strong characters. The damage penalty doesn't apply to the bow nor to magic, meaning your character can still provide different types of support and not be a burden. Additionally, you can now equip up to 2 weapons on a character if both of the weapons are one-handed. The main benefit of this is that it allows you to do more damage, and depending on the weapon, allows you to mix and match elemental damage that you can apply to an enemy. Weapons now also have levels, subsequently called weapon levels, where if a character uses a certain weapon repeatedly, they'll become more familiar with it and eventually do more damage with it. There isn't much else to add, but I do again like the sense of growth with this, as it does add more immersion. Because realistically, and this comes from a person who has never wielded a weapon for combat before in his life, it would take some time to get used to a new weapon. Because let's say you pick up a sword, you'll need to get used to its weight, balance, and range, especially when in combat. Because you can't suddenly pick up a sword and all of a sudden you're fighting like Yoshimitsu or a master of the blade all of a sudden. Then in terms of attributes, there are now 11 tied to each character. The first one is HP, short for health points, and is how much health your character has. Losing HP is the way to increase your maximum health. MP, short for magic or mana points, dictates spell and magic usage. Using skills that require MP improves your maximum amount. The third stat, which is strength, which defines how hard you hit, is increased mainly by attacking during battles. The fourth stat is stamina, which is directly tied to your maximum HP, dictating how much your maximum HP increases when you level up. Just like HP, you can increase the stat by losing HP during battles. The fifth stat is Spirit, which determines the potency of the character's white magic spells. You can increase this by using white magic during battles. The sixth is Agility, which determines how often a character can attack in battle. You can improve this by battling when your evasion is high. The seventh stat is Intellect, which determines the potency of the character's black magic spells. You can increase this by using black magic during battles. The eighth stat is Magic, which is directly tied to your MP, affecting how much your maximum MP will increase when you level up. You increase the stat by using MP during battles. The ninth stat is Accuracy, and as the name suggests, describes the chance of your character's attack landing. Strength and accuracy grow together and is more dependent on the quality of the weapons you are using. The 10th stat is Evasion, which is basically tied to evading or blocking enemy attacks. This can either be raised by being attacked or equipping a shield to your character. And finally, we have Magic Defense, which is, as it sounds, how resistant your character is to magical attacks. This can be improved by being hit by, magical attacks. An additional one I just forgot to mention also is Magic Interference, which just affects the accuracy of your magic spells, as well as how much damage they deal. And the only thing that may influence a stat is just what the current party member is wearing, where a higher magic interference will make your spells less effective and vice versa. In the game, there is also a new key term system, where sometimes a character will say something important, usually highlighted with a color, and a sound goes off when they appear. You can then use the learn command to memorize that term. Memorizing the term then allows you to then ask about it, helping you progress the story in certain areas. Then in terms of the chests, there's nothing really new about them, as some of them contain treasure and some contain monsters and a treasure. Although be careful, because sometimes the bosses in these chests are quite tough. I do also want to speak about the monsters as well. In Final Fantasy 1, you are locked from exploring a majority of the areas due to lack of suitable transport. But in 2, you can explore nearly anywhere you want, meaning you can accidentally enter areas where the monsters' levels are way higher than yours, not giving you a fighting chance and your party most likely going to be demolished, without even a chance to flee. Also, the monsters can give more status effects that hinders your party. For example, you can meet these god-forsaken mistakes and get stun locked, giving you a swift ending and sending you to the grave quite easily. There are also enemies that can hit you with instant death attacks, but I'll cover that a bit later. Now with all of that out of the way, we can now go on to the main story of Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy II opens with a peaceful scene, with the text saying, "A long live peace," with 3 ellipses. Then all of a sudden, the music becomes more sinister and harsher, and the text reads, "Is at an end." It then cuts to the Emperor with the soldiers standing behind him as he is raining chaos in the world by sending forth his minions after everyone. It then reads that the Emperor of Palamecia has summoned monsters from the underworld for world domination. We then cut to the royal castle of Fynn, where the princess forms a rebel army to fight off the Emperor. However, the castle fell due to an all-out assault by the Empire. The princess is then rushed out of the castle by some soldiers. We do see that one of the characters stepped back hesitantly, then fled, either out of fear or he had betrayed them. Then one of the soldiers stays behind to fend them off and buy the princess time. although from the scene, it looks like he was surrounded and failed to escape. Out of choices, the rebels then retreat to the remote town of Altair. We then cut to the main party. They don't have an official name, but are currently fleeing from the Imperial forces and are unsuccessful. We immediately enter a battle we cannot win, our party getting decimated without even getting a chance to fight back. After losing the fight, we then cut to the Princess of Finn and a man in white robes healing us. The princess's name is revealed to be Hilda, and the man in white robes is named Minwu. They speak to one another, revealing that they found the party in the forest with terrible wounds from the fight. Before Minwu is done healing us, Hilda mentions that they need to attend a meeting to discuss the dreadnought that is currently being constructed in Basques by the Empire. This is the only thing that the Empire needs to finish before they can begin their next attack. Shortly after they leave, Furion wakes up, confused about where he is. He immediately calls out for his comrades before leaving to look for them. Then leaving the room, he immediately finds Guy and Maria, who are unsure whether he would make it or not. After a brief moment of relief, he notices that Leon is not there. Maria, still emotional over the matter, looks away, probably because she doesn't want to speak about it as she fears the worst. Guy speaks instead, informing that Hilda saved them, but Leon wasn't there. Furion then reassures everyone that Leon is probably fine before walking to the adjacent room. Although there isn't much of a description of Leon's character, let's overanalyze a bit, because I don't really have much else to go on. Furion and Maria are quite close to Leon. Based on Furion's prompt response, it implies that Leon was a reliable and resourceful person who was more than capable of taking care of himself. This is further supported by the fact that neither Guy nor Maria argued further, nor was there a sense of urgency, because if he was believed to be weak or incapable, Furion would have probably said we need to find him as soon as possible. Either that, or there really wasn't much thought put into this, as Furion had only just recovered from some heavy wounds and maybe was still reeling and didn't have the energy for a further response. Upon entering the room, Hilda is pleased to see the party alive and well. After the party thanks the rebel army for saving them, they immediately ask for Hilda to allow them to join the rebel army. Hilda immediately turns down their request due to the party's lack of experience, fearing they would only throw their lives away, and instead suggesting they head home. The party then reveals that they have no homes to return to, as the Imperials had destroyed their homes and have killed nearly all of their loved ones. While Hilda feels some sympathy for them, she is still adamant about them not joining the army, and offers them to stay in Altair instead. She then gives them the password Wild Rose to make the adjustment to living there a bit easier. Committing the password to memory, we can then ask Hilda to learn more about it. She explains that the Wild Rose is the insignia of the Kingdom of Finn, representing hope for a future of strength and beauty. Hilda also speaks about the Empire's captives that are suffering in confinement, and suggests that Maria's missing brother, Leon, may be there. However, the Emperor's beasts are currently occupying Finn, making it a dangerous area for the time being. She then directs us to Minwu, telling us that he is a white wizard and may be of assistance to us. Before leaving, the party is free to speak to everyone in the rebel hideout. Speaking to Minwu, he mentions that our fates and his are closely intertwined, telling us that our first step towards our destiny is heading to Finn. Mentioning the password Wild Rose to him, he will commend us on using it so quickly, and will mention that we should listen to everything we hear carefully, and that our party can be revived at a sanctuary that is available in each town for free. You can also find this one wizard in the corner who is always flip-flopping on his opinion about us. When the party is facing a challenge, he gives the usual "you will succeed" speech, but when you succeed, he'll pretend he was supporting us the entire time, which I found to be pretty funny. Also, he doesn't have any major implications to the story, so it's nothing to really delve into. Speaking to this wizard, he also mentions the town of Gatria, which is to the north of the rebel base. Although he doubts we would make it that far, he advises us to go to speak to the wizards in the room that we were revived in, as these wizards will just explain the game's mechanics to you. The wizards found in this room are reminiscent of the 4 wizards that you'd find in the first inn in Cornelia in Final Fantasy I, where those wizards would also explain all of the game's mechanics. Speaking to the residents in the rebel hideout, they'll tell you that Hilda is doing well and leading the rebel army, while the king is resting after obtaining a grievous wound while escaping Finn. You can find him in the base for the rebel army. Speaking to him, he reveals that he was hit in the back by an arrow, stating that Hilda is taking his place while he heals. Leaving the base, you can also come across Paul, the friendly neighborhood thief. He is quite open about being a thief, even bragging that he is the greatest one in the world and can burgle nearly anything, stating that he has been benefiting from the Imperials. Using the password Wild Rose, he mentioned that he would never steal from the rebels, stating that he can't go home due to the Empire occupying the city, thus having a grudge against them. Speaking to the residents, you can also find out a bit more about Altair, such as that the reason why the base is safe is because the Empire has not sent out their troops this far out yet, and it is only a matter of time until they do though. Speaking to this old man in the weapons armory, he initially says that he is an old man, but using the Wild Rose password on him, he reveals that his name is Tobal and that he is the greatest blacksmith in the rebel army, only pretending to be an ordinary old man. In the opening cutscene, there was also a character that we saw fleeing when the Imperialists were invading the castle. We can find the same person in Altair. Speaking to him, he reveals his name is Gordon, the Prince of Kashwan, and when speaking to him, you find that he fled out of fear when his brother Scott fell in battle. Looking at the opening scene, we can deduce that the soldier over here is Scott. Although Gordon mentions that he fled after Scott fell, he can be seen fleeing before Scott was surrounded. He could either be misremembering due to the fear that overcame him when the Imperials attacked, making him warp the events in his head, or it could be an oversight from the developers. Leaving and heading to Gatria, we are exposed to our first encounters, which works similarly to that in Final Fantasy I, where you fight enemies of varying strength depending on the area you are in. Upon arriving at Gatria, the village is quite peaceful with barely any Imperial presence. Speaking to the residents, there is mention of Fynn being occupied by the Imperial forces and the gate being closed. One of the residents also mentioned that on the outskirts of Fynn, there is a barkeep that couldn't escape in time and is currently stuck there serving the Imperials. Additionally, there is again mention of the Dreadnought. But now we are given a tiny bit of info where it said that nothing would be able to stop it upon its completion. Leaving Gatria and arriving at Fynn, a small cutscene plays out. Furion stops and tells both Guy and Maria that the city is overrun with Imperial soldiers, warning them not to get close. I found this area to be quite interesting, because when exploring the area, you can enter encounters with monsters like you usually would in the overworld or in dungeons. However, this is a city map, where in Final Fantasy I, the only places you would have encounters is either on the fortresses or in dungeons, whereas this is a city map. By adding these encounters, it emphasizes the feeling that the city is hostile towards you, where it is under the Emperor's control and these monsters are freely roaming around the city. Even when you enter the stores, you'll find them to be empty, giving the idea that you're alone in enemy territory. While the soldiers won't directly come after you, speaking to them will initiate a fight with the soldier. My advice would be to immediately flee these fights as you are much weaker in comparison. Remember, in the beginning, Hilda mentions that the party lacks experience. Thus, she turned them away from the rebel army, whereas these soldiers are much more experienced and stronger. So for now, it would be best to just fight the monsters that you randomly encounter. Exploring this town, there really isn't much to find. But if you remember what one of the Gatria citizens mentioned, they mentioned that on the outskirts of town, there was a barkeep that couldn't escape. If you look at the map, you will see a bar at the far right. But to get to it, you have to go to the top of the map, but just enough that you don't accidentally leave, or else you will have to enter again and start from scratch. Carefully moving through this area, you will eventually reach the bar. Entering the bar and speaking to the barkeep, he will first be angry and shouting that customers are not allowed behind the counter. But mentioning the password Wild Rose to him, he will immediately realize you are a part of the rebels and help. He mentioned that there is a secret door behind him and inside is a wounded soldier. He then says he's going to leave and that the party can handle things from there. Entering and following along the secret passage, we will eventually come across the wounded soldier in a bed. This soldier turns out to be Scott, Gordon's older brother. Initially, he is wary of us, but once we mention the password Wild Rose, he is relieved to find out that we are rebel soldiers. Or at least he thinks so. Furion speaks and mentions that everyone is under the impression that he fell in battle and says that he is happy that he turned out to be alive. Before the party can get their hopes up, Scott says that while he is alive, he won't be for much longer. With this, he then gives us his final requests. He first wants the party to tell Gordon that he has more strength than he realizes and to believe in himself. He also wants us to tell the king that Count Borgen was a traitor and was the reason for Fynn falling so quickly, mentioning that the Count has been made a general in the Imperial army. His final request is then for us to tell Hilda that he loved her, but he then quickly takes it back, mentioning it would only bring her pain. Maria then briefly interrupts, inquiring whether he knew of her brother Leon and his whereabouts. Unfortunately, Scott has no information on that. Scott then stands from his bed, handing us his ring and telling us that it may be useful. He then mentions that he is starting to feel weak and needs to rest. Scott then collapses, giving in to his wounds. The party then leaves without saying a word and returns to Altair. Also, as I'm saying it more and more, I feel like I'm mispronouncing it, so I'm just going to call it Altair, because Altair, I'm just like basing it off of the protagonist from Assassin's Creed 1. Before we move on, I think it's important to take a deeper look into these scenes. Firstly, it is confirmed that the reason why Gordon ran was out of fear. This confirmed why he's regarding himself as a coward. But Scott didn't think any less of his brother and shows no ill will towards him. He probably understood that Gordon was still lacking battle experience and that he would have died if he did not flee. It could mean that if Gordon didn't flee, Scott would have forced him to flee with the princess. He may also have predicted that Gordon would be blaming himself. So in his last breaths, he requested that Gordon should trust in himself more. Because remember, this was his brother. And if they weren't close, Gordon wouldn't be racked with guilt behind the rebel army base because he can't face Hilda, who Scott was trying to protect, feeling he failed her. Another thing that I found interesting was how Furion and the others intercepted and reached Scott. I'm assuming that Furion only mentions the password Wild Rose, which is a rebel army code word. If you remember from the beginning of the game, Hilda refused to accept the party into the rebel army, only giving the party the password so that their new lives in Altair could be easier. This meant that Fuler and company aren't rebels, nor are they a part of the rebel army. They just knew the code word. However, the people they spoke to were under the assumption that they were a part of the rebel army, as the barkeep assumed they were the rebels, and Scott believed us to be rebel soldiers. If I had to take a guess, it could be due to the rebel army still not being as organized as an actual military like the Imperials, as they have no uniform to recognize one another, probably due to them working under the Empire's noses, and don't really have any other form of identification besides the code word. This could also show some naivety from the princess by so easily giving out the password to a random group of people she found wounded in the forest. However, there is some room for error that we can forgive her for, because she was just appointed regent and is still lacking in some experience in warfare. This again is understandable, as it also adds realism to the rebel army, as it shows that they aren't a formal military operation, and those managing it may be inexperienced and unable to recognize certain pitfalls. We should also keep in mind that they are working with limited resources and experience. The characters also not saying something could also be them at a loss for words, or could be the idea that there really isn't anything else to say. They saw a soldier give his final words, and in essence, his deathbed confession. And also, they didn't really have time to mourn him, because they didn't really know him, nor did they have the time. Because even though there isn't a timer, they are still deep in enemy territory. And if they stay behind to mourn, the higher the chance of Imperial soldiers entering, seeing us and trapping us, putting Scott's final wishes in vain. Because if you were a soldier and suddenly saw a random group of strangers next to a soldier of rebels inside a secret passage, you would be able to connect the dots quite quickly. And remember, Scott was well known in the rebel army. Another thing I find interesting is that in Final Fantasy II, we are introduced to our first death of a side character in the series. In Final Fantasy I, we saw the death of the Fiends and Garland, as well as some dead mermaids. But we didn't have an ally that has died in front of us with a name. This adds more emotional depth to the game's story. Returning to Altair and speaking to Gordon, you can show him the ring, where he will immediately recognize it and will be in disbelief as the party shares Scott's final words, where he will be surprised that his brother said those things about him. Then entering the hideout and speaking to Hilda, you can then also show her the ring, where she too will recognize it. Furion will then communicate to her that Scott has passed away, and Hilda then asks if he had anything else that he wanted to share that was from Scott, but Furion decided to honor Scott's last wishes and didn't share the fact that he loved her. Furion then tries to give it to her, but she requests that we keep it as it suits a personage of courage. With us returning with the ring, it proves to the princess that the party is capable of handling themselves, and that she had underestimated us. She then requests that we join the rebel army. Then afterwards, she then mentions that we would need a magical metal called mithril, and that she would require strong warriors to obtain it. Memorizing it, and then asking her about it, she then mentions that Finn has lost due to them being ill-equipped, as the Empire fought with weapons and armor made of mithril. She then tells us that she charged a man living in Salamand named Joseph with finding a source of the metal. However, they have been unable to communicate with Joseph for some time now, and she is quite worried. She then requests that the party travels with Minwu, the White Wizard, to investigate this. Speaking to Minwu directly after this, he says he heard Hilda's request and is ready to accompany them. He then tells them that we need to pass through the port town of Paloom to reach Salamand. And to reach this port town, he then gives us his canoe, which would allow us to travel directly over the small lake and into the port town. Then, Minwu joins our party temporarily. Throughout Final Fantasy II, you'll notice that the fourth member of the party is always changing, introducing guest characters. This contrasts Final Fantasy I, where your party members didn't really change. By the way, Minwu is a godsend, as he is a white wizard and has access to a plethora of white magic spells which are all at a decent level. These spells can either buff your party or heal them, and personally I would recommend keeping him in the back, but again, it doesn't really matter because eventually, if you keep him in the front, Minwu will grow to handle better in the fights. So now, we need to get Salamand, which is right here. There are a couple of ways to go about this. The first is to head to Paloom, as per Hilda's suggestion, pay for a ship ride that takes you to Poft, then head directly to Salamand. The second, and cheapest option, is to turn off encounters and walk all the way there. You can head in this direction where eventually you'll circle around the world and reach Salamand. The third and final one, which in my opinion is the masochistic one, is to basically do the second one, except leave your encounters on. Honestly, if you make it, you'll most likely be over-leveled for a lot of the future locations and will have a ton of gil, especially if you have the boosters on. I personally haven't done it myself, but that's what I'm guessing will happen, and I'm unsure if it's even possible. So yeah, if you want to go with this route, have fun, let me know. So following the first option, the party sails across the lake nearby and reaches Paloom. Arriving, you'll meet a friendly pirate who offers transport to Poft for 32 gil. But before we accept, we can choose to explore the town a bit. Speaking to the residents of Paloom, we can find out the following. 1. Neither Paloom or Poft are under the Empire's control, but they know that it is only a matter of time until it happens. Secondly, once you pass Poft, you will be in the Empire's territory, as Bafsk and Salamand are under the Empire's control. And thirdly, Fearon has game as a girl just ask him straight up if she wants to get married. Okay, the last one isn't as important, but I just wanted to cover everything I found here. After paying the man the requested gil, he'll then take us all the way to Poft. Poft is another harbour town, but seemingly less developed than Paloom. Here you can meet Sid and his crew. Sid is the owner of the airship that you see occasionally flying around the map. Speaking to the crewmate next to him, you can then find that they charge different rates to transport you to different areas using the airship. This same crewmate also mentions that there exists only one airship in this world, making it a unique way to get around. Speaking to some of the crew members, they also mention something terrible is being built in Bafsk, but they're probably referring to the dreadnought that was mentioned at the beginning of the game. And also, if you speak to one of them, you already spoke to most of them because they all repeat the same thing. Leaving Poft, we can head directly to Salamand, but instead, out of curiosity, I headed to Bafsk instead. Arriving there, you can already see some Imperial soldiers, and speaking to anyone, none of them say a word. The only person that says something is the central figure, the Dark Knight, who asks what are we doing, just standing around, and orders us then to move. Speaking to this one soldier here as well, he gives us some explanation as to why everyone is silent. He mentions that if he gets caught talking while the Dark Knight is present, he could be killed for dereliction of duty. Although this is quite small, it gives us an idea that the Dark Knight is a force to be reckoned with and is loyal to a fault to the Empire, as he uses his fear to make sure the Empire's demands are met, and that if anyone fails to adhere to their duty to the Empire, they'll face severe repercussions. Also, if you are outside the city, you can see the giant ship, but it is in an inaccessible area. This is the Dreadnought and will become more significant later, even though it is already significant in the story. Since there isn't much to do here, we can leave and head directly for Salamand, which is a village near the snowing mountains. Entering the town, you can find that the place is quite peaceful and there's barely any Imperial presence there. Speaking to the villagers, they tell the party that all of the male villagers were rounded up by the Empire and sent to Summit Falls to mine mithril, the metal the rebels are after. Entering Joseph's home, the party can speak to him, but he'll be very secretive and impatient. Mentioning the password Wild Rose, he won't believe we are part of the rebels. But as soon as we mention Mithril, his entire demeanor changes, where he frantically looks around him and tells us he has a few leads but hasn't found a source yet. He then refuses to share anything he does know, as we are just strangers to him. To prove who the party says they are, he gives them the task of going to Summit Falls and rescuing the enslaved villagers there. Only after that happens, he will talk to us. When speaking to one of the villagers about Summit Falls, one of them will mention that it is south of Salamand. Heeding these clues and directions, we can use the canoe to reach this cave right here. Entering this cave, the party will have to navigate the caves until they reach the enslaved prisoners below. Also, by the entrance, you'll just see this giant blue crystal. Interacting with it does nothing, so it's best left alone. For now at least. When you go deep enough and find the captured villagers, you'll notice among them a familiar face. Paul, the world's greatest thief he met in Altair. Speaking to him, he immediately recognizes Firion. He explains that the girl next to him is Joseph's daughter, Nellie, and believes that General Borgen kidnapped Nellie and is using her as leverage against Joseph. He further elaborates, saying that he was assisting Hilda with finding the mithril she was looking for, and that once he found out that Summit Falls were the source for it, he wanted to one-up the party by grabbing the mithril before they arrived. But unfortunately, due to a slip-up, he got caught and is now here. He then agrees to help the party by taking care of the hostages, helping them to escape. Although the party have saved the hostages, they can't leave as yet, as they still haven't found the mithril. Thus, the party still has to go deeper. Upon reaching the final cave, you will then come face to face with a soldier blocking a treasure chest. The soldier immediately recognizes that Fearon and his party are the rebels, and tells us that the mithril is behind him, but the party will have to defeat him to get to it. We immediately enter a boss fight, but there isn't really much to write home about, as it's just a pretty simple fight. Upon defeating the soldier, we acquire the mithril from the chest, allowing us to leave Summit Falls. Heading back to Salamand, you'll find that all the male villagers have returned. Speaking to one of them, they'll mention something about a snowcraft that will be able to help you traverse the heavy snow behind the snowy mountains, and that it belongs to Joseph. They also mention that it is near a blue crystal we saw earlier behind the wall. When entering Joseph's house, we see that Paul also returned Nellie to her home, and speaking to Joseph, he'll just tell us to go directly to Hilda with the mithril. He's probably too concerned at the moment about Nellie's well-being, as she was just rescued from a kidnapping, so he just wants to probably check on her and doesn't really have much time to deal with us. Thus why he's just telling us to promptly go to Hilda with the mithril. So when I went back to Altair, I discovered a bit of an annoying bug that I'm unsure only lies with the Pixel Remaster edition of Final Fantasy II. If you use the airship and arrive at your location, you can cause the game to slightly bug out with the shadows. When you arrive after being dropped off by the airship and immediately enter a location before the airship leaves, this will leave an annoying shadow, and will only disappear when you take another ride on the airship. To avoid this, I would recommend waiting for the airship to leave the screen, then enter the location you were transported to, because it isn't game breaking, but it is annoying. And depending on its position, it can make it look like some forms of transport are actually floating and will break the shadow by the airship when you go back to it. Going back to Alta and speaking to Hilda, she immediately mentioned the dreadnought being built in Basque. But this time the word is highlighted in red, now becoming a key word we can learn about and ask. Speaking to her about it, she tells us that it is a massive and heavily armed airship. Asking Hilda then about airship, she will speak about Sid, mentioning that he was the former captain of the Order of the White Knights, and that he himself built the airship and uses it to fly around. She then goes on to elaborate that he left the Order of the White Knights as the airship captivated him, eventually leading him to leave Finn and the army of Finn feeling his absence. She then concludes that he then allows people to ride the airship for money so that he can use that same money for renovations on the airship, as far as she is aware. By us being able to learn and ask about the dreadnought and airships, it could signify that Hilda is beginning to trust us more, as when it was previously mentioned, the option to memorize it was unavailable, meaning that due to our success with acquiring the mithril, the party is being seen as a critical part of the rebel army. Showing her the mithril, she will instruct the party to give it to Tobal, the old man we met earlier, so that he will be able to make weapons. Giving it to Tobal, he immediately gets to work. Once he's given the metal, the party is then able to purchase mithril armors and weapons from the store. Entering the hideout after delivering the mithril, you can then find new people at the rebel hideout. One of the wizards then mentioned that the dreadnought will bring horror that the world has never known before and begs us to destroy it before it's too late. Speaking to Hilda again, she mentions that the Dark Knight was overseeing the construction of the dreadnought and that he was capable at his job. But due to the party interfering with the Empire's mithril operation, he needed to leave to address it, providing the rebels an opportunity to stop the dreadnought. She immediately then tasked the party to head for Bast and stop it. Oh, and by the way, if you were like me and took the airship here, well, sucks to be you. The ship we used earlier is still at Poft, meaning we're going to have to take the option 2 and 3 that I mentioned earlier in the video and trek all the way to Bast. Honestly, this was one of the things that I disliked about Final Fantasy II. As far as I know, there isn't a return flight back, as Sid is all the way in Poft, where the ship is used to get there. And this kind of sucks because then you have to take this long distance trip, and honestly it is slow and painful. But finally reaching Basque, we can see that the town has a different atmosphere. You'll find that the Dark Knight left and put General Borgin in charge in his place. Speaking to the townsfolk, you'll see that few of them have good things to say about Borgin, generally saying they don't feel like working under a buffoon like him, some even sickened by him. Interestingly enough, it contrasts so much that the people forgot what it was like working under the Dark Knight. One of them mentioned that a rebel spy is also pretending to be an Imperial soldier and that for us, it would be invaluable to speak to him. Speaking to the soldier from the last time the party was in Basque, the spy made a comment then about Borgin, calling him a bumbling idiot and being surprised by his position in the Imperial army. Asking about the dreadnought, the spy immediately understands that our party was sent to destroy it. He then tells us about a secret passage in the sewers behind him, and to avoid suspicion, he wishes the party good luck and promptly takes leave so that he isn't seen speaking to them. The party will then have to fight through the sewers so that they can reach the dreadnought. By finally reaching the end of the sewers, the party comes face to face with the Dark Knight, telling us that we are too late as the dreadnought is complete, as he was working on it behind the scenes just to make sure that it was completed. Before we can run after him, Borgin shows up to block our path, mocking the party and gloating about the destruction that is going to ensue. The party then follows him outside, where they watch the dreadnought take off and lay destruction to Poft, Altair, and other locations. Before leaving to check on Altair, the party can go into the room Borgin was in previously to find a chest containing a pass. But before we continue, let's just do a quick dive into everything we have seen thus far. So previously when Hilda mentioned how Finn's army fell to mithril weapons, it could give us more of an understanding as to how the rebels have been pushed so far and why they aren't able to fight back. Mithril was described to be a magical metal that left Hilda feeling as if the rebel army was ill-equipped due to mithril's superiority to what they currently had. It is also implied to be critical for the Empire, as it was enough reason to put the Empire's power off balance just by losing it as a source. Looking at all of this, it could imply that while Finn could have originally held back the Empire's forces, by them having an edge due to the mithril, their defenses became insufficient, being one of the key factors for Finn's fall and the struggle of the rebels. And then on to Sid. When speaking to Hilda about Sid, she mentioned that he left the Order of the White Knights in pursuit of his passion for riding his airship. She mentions that he mainly used the money he earns from transporting on renovations for the airship. But I do have a theory about this, and it may be BS, but still I want you to stick with me. Hilda mentions that the airship was built by Sid, implying that Sid is the only one with the knowledge of developing airships. When the party finds Sid, he isn't very social and is drinking at the pub in Poft, So to develop the Dreadnought, which in itself is also an airship, Sid may have had some role in it and is possibly drinking out of guilt. And there are three different possibilities. So the first possibility is that his plans for his airship or a prototype were stolen due to a spy. If you remember the crew, they all look exactly the same, as they all were wearing the same uniform, making it difficult to differentiate one from the other. It is possible that someone from the Empire may have dressed up as them and may have taken it from right under his nose. Alternatively, and more likely, General Borgen may have stolen the plans and given it to the Emperor to gain some form of leverage or prove his loyalty. Because before he was a general of the Emperor's army, he was a part of Finn's kingdom as a count, explaining why he was able to climb the ranks so quickly. Another possibility was that he had a previous airship that he had crashed or lost, leading to the Empire being able to recover it and reverse engineer the technology. I'm also assuming that the Emperor also has the ability to command flying monsters, which would be able to bring it down, or maybe it was a surprise attack and Sid happened to be in the area. The existence of a second airship wasn't really confirmed throughout the story, but maybe Sid hid it and is feeling guilty about it, explaining how the Empire got their hands on the tech. The third and final possibility is that Sid may have also worked on it unintentionally. It may have been through false pretense, such as the airship being used for a different reason, or due to mind control. I'll explain why I think mind control is a possibility later. When entering Basque, we had our first encounter with the Dark Knight, one of the strongest generals in the Empire. His presence and actions are strong and fearful enough that his commands are absolute, where all the citizens and knights in Basque didn't speak, even if they weren't directly near the Dark Knight. It's also implied that alongside his power that he was strategic and cunning, as he was able to predict when Furion's party would arrive and was able to mislead the rebel army's intelligence, leading him to complete the Dreadnought faster than they knew. Previously, I mentioned the idea of mind control. The reason I say this is because once the Dark Knight left, you can speak to one of the villagers who say that they can't even remember what it was like when they were working for him. Additionally, when he speaks to the rebel spy, he mentions that the Dark Knight has only been gone recently, implying that not much time has passed since then. Often, when someone is under mind control, they are non-responsive and quiet, implying that the soldier and villagers weren't afraid to speak, but they couldn't speak. Another sign of mind control is that once it ends, nobody remembers anything about what happened. Although they still remember that they were under his command, they can't remember what it was like. This could be mind control, or it could be that Borgen is so bad at his job that it outshines the Dark Knight. But there would be some remembrance of him in command, as I am under the assumption that the Dark Knight was in charge of the development of the Dreadnought from start to finish. The possibility of mind control also could be the reason how they were possibly able to get Sid to help develop it or design it. Unfortunately, the rebels were too late in stopping the completion of the Dreadnought, preventing its destruction or Ozguna raid. Exploring the towns where the Dreadnought hit, you can see they are damaged significantly, and all the citizens are in despair. Arriving at Poft, the woman in front is in disbelief as a majority of everyone in Poft is dead. Looking around, all the buildings are damaged, and impacts by the Dreadnought can be seen all around. Our other citizens that were previously present have died. Entering the pub, you can see that Sid's crew didn't fare any better, as only one remains. Speaking to Sid about the Dreadnought, he mentions that you want to target the engine of it to bring it down. Further asking about airships, he tells the party that they are powered by Sunfire, making the assumption that the Dreadnought follows the same system. You can then ask about Sunfire. He mentions that it's difficult to control, and that if not controlled properly, you can easily lose control of the airship. Arriving at Altair, you can see the town didn't fare any better than Poft. Entering the hideout, you can find the citizens where they tell you the rebels evacuated them inside. You can also find this one child who nonchalantly says that everyone outside is dead, and I don't really know how to take that, but anyway. Additionally, one of the villagers mentioned that Gordon has disappeared and that the king's condition has worsened. Speaking to the king, he mentions the loss of Scott, Gordon's brother. He further tells us that Scott proposed to Hilda, but didn't hear the answer as the Empire attacked. Asking him about the Dreadnought, the king will be in shock as this is the first he heard of such a thing, implying that Hilda was keeping him in the dark in fear that it would only make him worry while he recovers. Speaking to Hilda, she speaks about the damage the Dreadnought caused, mentioning that even the shock of its attack led to the king's condition worsening. She herself also mentions that she hates that her father has to be witness to this and that the king knows his death is near. Maria, out of compassion, then asks Minwu if he could help the king. He speaks about death being inevitable, but he still has a duty as a white wizard to ease the pain of those who suffer. He then tells Furion that he'll need to remain in Altair to take care of the wounded, thus leaving the party. Returning to Hilda, she mentions that Minwu's presence has helped the king's condition improve. Then asking her about Sunfire, she mentions that it is the crest of the kingdom of Kashuan, the kingdom where Gordon and Scott were the princes of. They both told Hilda stories about the flame and that it cannot be held by a normal torch. Furion then shares with Hilda that Sunfire is able to destroy the Dreadnought, and without wasting time, the princess commands Firion's party to head to Keshwan Keep, where she will also travel to meet with us. But she then raises the question of what will the party use to bring it back? A valid and critical question. So before we can head there, they'll need to find a suitable way to transport it. Leaving and speaking to Minwu, he'll say that he can't do much to help the king, as the damage is more than physical. Then asking him about the Sunfire, he mentions the Festival of the Flame held every 3 years in Keshwan Keep. He mentions that during the festival, the Sunfire is moved to Egil's torch while the brazier is cleaned, telling us that Egil's torch is what the party needs. Then asking the king about the Sunfire, the king mentions that Scott sealed the gates of Keshwan Keep to protect the Sunfire if they were ever defeated in battle. He then tells the party that the goddess's bell will be needed to break the seal. Inquiring further about the bell, he'll mention that its whereabouts are known only to the Kashwan royal family. Asking Minwu about it, he'll mention that Gordon would know where it is, but he hasn't been seen in a while. He then suggests someone close to Gordon or Scott may know. Then asking Hilda about it, she will suggest contacting Joseph as he may know the whereabouts of the bell. Returning to Salaman and speaking to Joseph, he'll thank the party for saving his daughter, telling the party that Borgin was using his daughter to threaten him. He then apologizes for his previous behavior and says he's willing to help in any way he can. Asking him about the goddess's bell, he mentions that it is in a snow cavern and that the only way to reach it is via his snowcraft. He tells the party he keeps it in a cavern in Semet Falls and is hidden behind a wall near the Blue Stone. To make up for his failure in finding the mithril, he offers to travel with us. Going to the directions indicated, a small cutscene will play where Joseph opens a secret entrance, where we can then find a chest containing the snowcraft, allowing us to traverse the heavy snow that we can find behind Salamand. Using the snowcraft and reaching this cave, the party then enters a cavern where they have to delve deep to reach the bell. Going through this cave, you'll eventually end up in a hot spring with a group of beavers. In the beginning, I mentioned that Guy was raised by wild animals, giving him the ability to converse with them. And when asking the beaver about the bell, the beaver tells Guy about a secret passage to the right and warns him about the giant monster guarding it. Making our way down the secret passage, the party eventually comes face to face with an adamantoise that is guarding the bell. Honestly, this is a pretty straightforward fight. The enemy isn't all that impressive, and if you are struggling, it is weak to Blizzard and can be one-tapped using Arctic Wind. Defeating it, we then obtain the goddess's bell. A path then opens up behind it, allowing us to leave. But before we can leave the cave, we are stopped by Borgin, who is upset as we got the bell before he could. He then blames the party for also ruining his standing with the Emperor, saying that now he'll be dead if he returns to Empire without the bell. Believing he is dead either way, he exclaimed that he will take us with him. Since I'm over-leveled at this point, the fight was pretty quick. Borgin then falls to the ground and the party walks past his corpse. Surprisingly, he's not dead and stands again, shouting that while he may have lost, the party hasn't won yet, revealing he has booby-trapped the caves. Before succumbing to his wound, he laughs one last time before collapsing. A giant boulder then starts rolling towards the party. The party is not fast enough to outrun it, and so in a heroic attempt, Joseph tries to stop the boulder momentarily. Guy refuses then to leave Joseph behind, but Firion grabs him and they run to get out of the boulder's path. Before his strength gives, he says that he is leaving the rest of Firion and apologizes to his daughter that he won't be able to return. And when his strength gives, he's crushed by the boulder, killing him instantly. The party in shock look in despair at Joseph's corpse. The party then leaves in silence. Speaking to the villagers in Salamand, they are all in shock over Joseph's death, one even telling the party to not let his death be in vain. Speaking to Nellie, she is aware of her father's death without being told, and the lady in pink dress outside says she will look after her. Heading to Kashwan Keep and interacting with the door using the goddess's bell, it will ring once, breaking the seal and allowing the party to enter and explore. Upon entering, we find Prince Gordon, who went missing during the Dreadnought's attack. He is surprised that someone else besides him can enter the keep. He reveals that he came to retrieve the Sunfire using Egil's torch, but the keep has become a monster's den. Fearing that he can't do this on his own and that he can't return empty-handed, he is unsure what to do next. Maria goes to comfort him and says that he knows his way around the keep, asking him then if he would be able to help them navigate it. He then tells us that the keep has many secrets and that he himself would be as lost as they were. However, he states that he has a spirit and requests to travel with Firion's party, to which Firion agrees. Making our way through the keep, the party eventually comes face to face with the Red Soul guarding Egil's torch. When battling it, it's kind of recommended to use mithril weapons, as they are strong enough to break through its high defenses. After defeating it, the party will then be able to obtain Egil's torch. Interacting with the Sunfire, it will immediately move to the torch. Then leaving Kashwan's keep with the Sunfire, a cutscene will play out. We can see that the airship currently carrying the princess is on its way to Kashwan Keep. But suddenly the Dreadnought appears behind it and captures the airship, kidnapping the princess and Sid. Returning to Altair and speaking to the citizens, they're all panicking due to the capture of the princess and the airship, and are pleading to Firion's party to go save her. Speaking to Minwu, he reveals that the princess was overcome with guilt over sending us on so many quests, so she thought that the least she could do was meet us at Kashwan's Keep. Speaking to a wizard in the hideout, he mentions that the Empire has a supply base to the north of Fynn, suggesting that the Dreadnought has stopped there to resupply. Following these directions, you go far enough on the map to circle around it, and eventually the party will arrive at the supply station, where they'll find the dreadnought currently docked. Entering it, we are finding the dreadnought, and the music becomes more militaristic, emphasizing we are deep in enemy territory. The party is immediately greeted by an Imperial soldier asking the purpose of our visit. Showing him the pass we obtained in Bafsk, he will immediately apologize and welcome us on board. As soon as he finishes, he immediately goes on break, leaving a more dangerous looking soldier to cover for him. Our goal here is to search for the princess. Speaking to the soldiers initiates a fight, and the thing about these fights is that once you win the battle, the soldier you fought won't disappear. Going deep into the dreadnought, we eventually find where the princess and Sid are being held. She immediately apologized to us and tells us that she meant to meet us at Cashron Keep, but it didn't go as planned. Speaking to Sid, he says that he will immediately head for the airship with the princess and will leave us with the task of destroying the dreadnought. He then tells us that while the party takes the sunfire to the engine, he'll prepare the airship for liftoff. Venturing deeper, the party eventually reaches the engine, where it allows us to toss in the sunfire. Doing so, the Dark Knight rushes forth, demanding us to tell him what we have done. Maria then recognizes the Dark Knight's voice, but before she can connect the dot, Firion tells her there is no time and that they have to get to Sid's airship. The party then reach Sid's airship with enough time to watch the dreadnought explode below them. Sid then flies the airship to drop the party and Hilda off at Altair and then takes his leave. Speaking to the residents, while everyone is happy about the princess's return, the king's condition has worsened. Entering the king's room, a cutscene plays out where Firion and the party speak to the king on his deathbed. The king then makes his final requests. He first tells Gordon that he has become so strong and that he wants him to lead the army and help Hilda in any way that he can. Gordon accepts this and swears on his life. The king then asks Minwu to break the seal on the ultimate magic. Minwu, understanding this, declares that it's time to break the seal on the ultimate tomb. The king then requests that Firion makes his way to Deist, the home of the Dragoon. Although they are all believed to be slain, he refuses to believe there are no survivors, and wishes for us to request support from the Dragoons and their wyverns. With his final breath, he requests us to take care of Hilda, finally succumbing to his wounds. Once the king has passed, Gordon with seriousness then says that there is no time to mourn as of yet, as the king has given them duties and they need to fill them as they are the king's final wishes. Gordon and Minwu then take their leave, with Firion following after. Gordon obviously leaves the party then as he is turning to the rebels. Speaking to Gordon, he mentions that the fight between the Emperor and the Dragoons was believed to be a mere skirmish, but it may be possible that the Emperor was afraid of them, thus aimed to wipe them out first. Asking about the Dragoons, Gordon tells the party that some believe that the Dragoons can't speak the language of wyverns. Inquiring more about the wyverns, he tells us that if we visit Paloom, we may find someone who will take us to Deist. Before heading to Deist, the party can also stop by Hilda's room and speak to her. However, when she's spoken to, the only thing she'll do is giggle. This may be possibly due to her going through so much and that the death of her father was too much for her, leading her to, in a sense, snap. Before we move on, there are some new points that I just want to quickly take a look at before we go on to the next chapter. First of all, there's Joseph. When you first met Joseph, he's very paranoid and cautious towards the party, barely giving us anything to go off of. From the way he acts, it's either due to Borgin keeping his daughter Nellie captive, causing him to become afraid that any slip up on his side could bring trouble to her. Another reason could be due to his experience in intelligence brokering. He is probably experienced and knows that if a random group of strangers all of a sudden walk into his home and spout the password Wild Rose, it doesn't mean they are part of the rebels, further supported by the fact they don't have any credible proof they belong to the rebel army. You may argue that when we ask for Mithril, he immediately tells us that he's still trying to find a source. Looking around frantically could suggest that the rebels in his house could spell dangers for his daughter. But when you realize that he's panicking, he immediately regains his composure and becomes careful with what he says. To prove that they are who they say they are, he tasks them with going to rescue the enslaved people in Summit Falls. He doesn't mention his daughter being among them, probably being cautious as to make sure that if this was a group of bandits, they can't take his daughter for themselves and use it as leverage against him. The reason why some people would try to gain leverage over Joseph is because he has a wealth of knowledge that could be valuable and lead to critical information. For example, when looking for the goddess's bell, Hilda immediately referred to Joseph being the main go-to. Additionally, we don't know where Joseph lived before, but he is able to operate independently when gathering information as he doesn't have any contacts from the rebels nearby. After rescuing his daughter, he is much kinder to us when helping us look for the goddess's bell. He apologizes for his previous behavior as he was paranoid over the safety of his daughter. It's also shown that he's quite selfless and heroic, as his last act was saving the party at the cost of his own life. Knowing that by doing this, he will be leaving his daughter behind. When he dies, we do get a bit of context regarding his relationship with the residents of Salaman, where everyone is heartbroken to find out he passed, showing that he was well known in the village and everyone was in some sense close to him. This also marks the first major death in the game with how the party reacted to his death. It's fair to assume that they have grown somewhat close during the journey, and his death just fuels the drive of the party to defeat the Empire. Next is Gordon. Later in the game, we meet again with Gordon, who is struggling to explore Cashron Keep. He's probably still feeling the weight of his brother's death on his shoulders, so to redeem himself, he wanted to retrieve the Sunfire for destroying the Dreadnought. It's unclear how he obtained this knowledge, but the most likely reason is that the Sunfire is only found in Kashwan Keep, and Sid mentions that his airship also uses the Sunfire to power his airship, implying that at some points he spoke to either the princes or the late king of Kashwan Keep to borrow its power. Although the Empire gaining access to this as well is unclear, it could be possible that it was obtained by Borgin, who was trying to gain leverage again with the Empire, where he could have stolen it and put it back to prevent the rebels from finding out about the construction of the dreadnoughts and the plans of the Empire. If you go along with the Sid being mind control theory or the second airship theory, it could also provide some explanation, but I digress. Seeing Gordon now, we can see that he is wanting to change, because previously he ran, but now he wants to stand up and fight, and his refusal to go back empty-handed shows his strong feeling towards the matter. He also isn't emotional or stupid enough to go in alone, as when we find him he is busy contemplating his options. When fighting through the monsters, Gordon grows stronger through experience, because it's assumed that when the Imperials invaded, he has never been in a real fight before. But now is his second chance, and with the party he becomes much stronger. Then, when he confronts a Red Soul, you can still tell that he isn't as battle-hardened as the rest of the party, but is able to confront enemies, not even suggesting they run nor showing signs of intimidation towards the Red Soul. He also gained valuable experience when rescuing the princess from the Dreadnought, because here he is deep in enemy territory, probably giving him the same feeling as when Castle Finn fell. But this time, things are different. He is stronger and won't run away. If we want to take a bit of a reach, we could also say that the reason why he doesn't speak while in the Dreadnought is to keep his nerves together, probably under immense pressure by the Imperial presence. When we return to the castle, the king gives his final words to Gordon. He tells Gordon that he has grown strong and that he wants him to lead the army, a tremendous task, and to help Hilda, a task previously given to his late brother Scott. Knowing that he can't take back his previous actions on the day Finn fell, he now has more confidence in himself and is given his chance to make up for his past mistakes. When accepting it, after saying my liege, he pauses, mentally preparing himself for the weight of the duty he is about to take on, that he previously thought himself unworthy to. After preparing, he accepts the new role. Once the king passes, Gordon is different now. He is more decisive and authoritative, a far cry from the person we first met in Altair. Without a moment to spare, he prepares for the war against the Empire and ensures to fulfill the king's final request for him. Leaving Altair and heading to Paloom, the party will come upon a friendly sailor who says that her ship was already setting sail for Deist, offering us to come with. Before Firion can accept, Miriam stops him and points out that this is too convenient and something doesn't seem right. Firion acknowledges her doubt and mentions that it may be true, but there aren't any other ships going to Deist, saying that they will have to take the risk. Agreeing to the ride, the sailor reveals her name to be Layla and tells us that she will be waiting for us outside of the city. While she leaves, Maria looks away in disappointment. Boarding Layla's ship, the ship begins sailing but stops in the middle of the ocean. The party is then immediately surrounded by pirates. Layla immediately mocks us, telling us that it isn't the smartest idea to trust pirates. She tells us that she'll be taking our loot and that we can leave with our lives. The party, instead of cowering away, immediately rushes her and her crew, fighting their way out. After defeating her crew, Layla tells them that she is beat and they can do whatever they want to. Firion looks at and discusses with his party members their next action. They then come to the conclusion that it would be better to fight the Empire together. Layla is surprised by the proposition, but is so enticed by it that she immediately then agrees after some thinking. She then tells her crew that they will be helping the party travel where they need to go. Layla then joins the party and gives the player control over the boat, allowing us to travel anywhere we want to as long as it can be connected by the ocean. Before heading to Deist, I also just wanted to explore, so I ended up going to this one little location over here called the Tropical Islands. Entering it, you can explore numerous dungeons, and reaching the end of it, the party will come face to face with a group of bighorns. Finally defeating them and losing the chest behind them, the party will obtain the Black Mask, which will be needed for later in the story, but right now is just not really needed. Heading to the northeastern corner of the map, we can dock the ship and reach Castle Deist. Upon entering the castle, we come across a child that is afraid of us and runs away to his mother. Speaking to the child again, he realizes that we aren't from the Empire, and asking him further about wyverns, he mentions that one is asleep in the room behind them and that his mother spoke of it dying soon. Asking the child then about dragoons, the child then mentions that his dream is to become one just like his father was. Speaking to the mother, she then apologizes on behalf of her son. She then tells us that her husband was a dragoon, but was killed alongside the others by the Empire. She tells us that behind her is the last living wyvern that is trying to communicate something to them, but they unfortunately can't understand it and can't help it. She then mentions a pendant that will be able to help us understand it and tells us that there is a cavern to the north of the castle containing one such pendant. Asking the mother about the dragoons, the mother tells us that the Empire had poisoned the water that the wyverns drank from, poisoning them and essentially severely weakening the strength of the dragoons. This bit of information can give us some understanding of how strategic and underhanded the Empire can be, as well as explain how the dragoons were defeated. Following the directions to the Wyvern Cave, we then enter a labyrinth, where in this cave system we can find the pendant by these remains right here. Additionally, if we go deep enough, we can find this pool blocked by chimeras. After defeating them, we can interact with the pool here, which reveals itself to be the life spring. But currently we don't have the necessary key items to use it, meaning we will have to come back later. Returning with the pendant and speaking to the sleeping wyvern, it immediately wakes. Furion then requests the aid of the wyvern in destroying the Empire. However, the wyvern is unable to help as it has already been poisoned and doesn't expect to live long. Asking it about the wyverns, it will then present the party with an egg. It explains that it doesn't have long to live and makes a final request. It asks us to take the egg and submerge it in the life spring, which we found earlier in the cave. It explains that if it isn't submerged, it will wither and die. After giving us the egg, the wyvern finally gives a final roar and sleeps. Taking the egg to the life spring, the party fulfills the wyvern's final request and submerges it in the life spring, allowing it to float all the way to the bottom and rest. Returning to where the wyvern was, it has disappeared, probably succumbing to the poison and passing on. Speaking to the mother also confirms this and tells us that one day the wyvern will hatch and will come to our aid. Returning to Altair and speaking to Gordon, he tells the party that Hilda has been acting weird as of late, as when he tries to speak to her, all she does is laugh, believing that the king's death has disturbed her. He then requests the party to go speak to her and see if maybe they are able to get through to her. Speaking to Hilda, a cutscene plays out. She says that she wants to discuss something with Furion. She goes deep into the room but stops, signaling that she wants to speak to him alone. The party look at one another and leave hesitantly to wait outside. Hilda then lies in her bed and beckons Furion to come to her. To be honest, the scene really caught me off guard as I wasn't expecting a cutscene like this to happen in the game. Furion then tells the princess he is unsure, but the princess flirtatiously replies and says that she doesn't enjoy being teased. Yeah. Furion, unsure what to do, slowly approaches, but suddenly Hilda shouts, "Now you're mine, Furion," with the princess suddenly transforming into a Lamia queen. Before the Lamia can attack, Furion hears Layla coming in to intervene. The rest of the party then rush in and prepare to battle the imposter. After the battle, Furion, who is slightly embarrassed, asks Layla how much of that she saw. Layla replies and mocks him for letting his guard down near the princess just because she was a pretty lady. Guy immediately interrupts, asking where the princess was. Just as he finished, a guard runs in with terrible news, telling the party that word has reached them that a tournament in Palamecia is taking place, with the princess as the prize. Gordon, worried for the princess's safety, tells us he'll be coming with us to rescue the princess. Layla, understanding Gordon's emotions over the matter, volunteers to watch the army with her crew. With Gordon rejoining the party and Layla remaining behind, the party makes haste for the tournament. However, they didn't mention where the tournament is being held as we don't know where Palamecia is, so we'll first need to inquire around before making our way there. Speaking to the wizard, he mentions a prison beneath the Colosseum where the tournament is being held, deducing the princess may be held there. Speaking to more people in the hideout, one mentions that the Colosseum is south of Cashwan Keep and warns us of the monsters there, pointing us to where the tournament is being held and subsequently the princess. Before leaving, you can also hear villagers saying that Minwu has not returned from Mysidia, probably still looking for the ultimate tomb. Following the directions and making our way to the Colosseum, we enter, passing a very large cage and eventually coming face to face with the Emperor, who is sitting relaxed on a throne. Before we can reach him, a gate suddenly shuts in front of us, blocking our path, and the gates behind us close, trapping the party inside the Colosseum. The Emperor then wishes us luck in the upcoming fight and reminds us that the prize is Hilda, the Princess of Fynn. Furion and company making their way down to the arena, and when stopping, watching the large cage we passed by earlier slowly open. Out of the cage, we hear rumbling footsteps and a behemoth of a beast steps out, walking towards us slow and menacingly. We then enter a fight, and again, if you have enough level, it's a bit of a cakewalk. The monster again isn't really anything to write home about, but just be careful because its physical attacks can do quite a number on you. After defeating the behemoth, the Emperor congratulates the party and says that it's time for the party to receive their reward. A thought then crosses Furion's mind. At least I'm assuming it's his idea, as there really isn't much context on who thought of this idea. This is a golden opportunity to slay the Emperor. Here the Emperor is, no guards, no weapons, clueless about our identity as he wouldn't focus on small fry like them. Essentially, a culmination of strength, stealth, and luck. There won't be a better opportunity to put an end to his conquest than what is before them now. Approaching him slowly, the party prepares to go in for the kill. However, before they can attack, the Emperor shouts, "Here is your reward." A reward that is befitting a rebel, Furion. And like that, the table has flipped. The Emperor is already aware of who the party were, and before they can strike, he disappears in a flash of light. Furion, looking around frantically, sees no trace of him. But before he can regain his composure, Imperial soldiers appear and surround the party. And to make matters worse, the Dark Knight appears before them, ordering the soldiers to throw them in the cells below. After coming to, Furion and company wakes up in a cell guarded by a single soldier, unsure of how to escape. We then see Paul sneak in, and he incapacitates the guard blocking our cell. While opening the gates, he tells us he is repaying the favor for them rescuing him from the mines. Before the party can thank him, he runs away to escape from the prison. Before we can follow suit, the party still has a mission to accomplish, and that is to find Hilda in the prison. Wasting no time, the party then searches the prison, defeating any that get in their way. Eventually, they find the cell Hilda is being kept in. Using the keys they found earlier, they unlock the gates, and Gordon rushes towards the princess. Gordon checks on Hilda's condition, with Hilda commenting on being surprised that Gordon came along. Fionn interrupts their reunion, stating that they are still in a dangerous area and tells Gordon to take the princess and leave, stating that they will distract the guards while they make their escape. Thankful, Gordon rushes out with the princess. The party then look at Fionn and worry before they escape. Making it back to Altair, we find a lone guard outside. Speaking to him, he tells the party that the rebel army has arisen and they are planning to retake Castle Finn, and that the party should head to the rebel camp near Finn to lend their strength. When we arrive in the rebel camp, we see that the rebels are in high spirits, ready to retake the castle and mentioning they have already breached the gates, and due to that, the enemy is in disarray, giving us the advantage. Speaking to Hilda, she will thank the party for saving her life and commend us for destroying the dreadnought. Mentioning the password Wild Rose to her, she will confirm that she is the real princess, and will then ask why Fionn is blushing, with the encounter between him and the imposter still fresh in his mind. Speaking to Gordon, he tells the party that they will be the heart of the attack. While the Imperials are preoccupied with the rebels, the party will sneak in and kill the Castellan, which is a fancy word for governor of a castle. To begin the attack, we can head directly to the castle. The path to the throne room is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is follow these stairs and defeat anyone who gets in our way. However, before getting past the first floor, Layla stops us, telling us that we won't want to continue without her, rejoining our party. Journeying to the throne room, the party will then come face to face with Gotos, the Castellan of the castle and enemy commander. Gotos, shocked to see us here, frantically looks for his soldiers, only then realizing that they were all fighting the rebels outside, being tricked and realizing that the outside fight was to trap him inside. We then enter a boss fight with Gotos. It's best you take him down as soon as possible, or else he'll start using enhanced attacks. Another insta-kill method is to cast Toad on him, but for that, the person casting it will need a high level Toad transformation spell, and an intelligence higher than 30, and after defeating Gotos, the screen then fades to black. Returning, a cutscene plays out where Gordon and Hilda are sitting on the thrones. Hilda mentions that she is happy to have retaken the castle and thanks the party once more, saying it would have not been possible without them. However, her worries are not over as she is concerned about Minwu's absence, as he has not communicated with them for some time. She apologizes for making a request so soon, but requests us to go to Mysidia to look for him. Inquiring further, she tells us that it is the land of mages, and that the ultimate magic that he is looking for is contained within the Mysidian Tower, and to obtain it the party require 2 masks. Inquiring about these masks, she mentions that there is a white mask and a black mask. The white mask lies beneath the castle and will require an incantation to be recited to open the secret door that leads to it. She then tells us the incantation, which is Ekmet to Lewis, which has been passed down from generation to generation. Looking this up, I actually found a funny Google translation. In Afrikaans, breaking it apart to Ekmet to Lewis, it translates directly to I am tired of reading or I am reading too much, or in Dutch, I have to lie. It was probably just gibberish, but I found it funny, and also Google Translate can be wrong as well. Unfortunately, asking about the incantation, the princess does not know the location of the door. Then speaking to Gordon, he also thanks us for our help in retaking the castle. He also mentions that he's worried about Minwu and requests us to head to Mysidia. Asking about the password, he mentions that with the king gone, Hilda would know the most about the castle. He then says that if Hilda wouldn't know, then Paul may have an idea, citing that Paul proclaims himself to be the greatest thief in the world. Unfortunately, since the prison, his location is currently unknown to us. Heading to Finn and asking around, one of the townsfolk tells us about Paul's house and that he is overjoyed to be back as most of his loot was likely there. Remembering our first encounter with him as well, he did mention that the Empire took his house when they invaded Finn, which caused him to hold a grudge against them. So it would make sense that he would immediately head there after retaking the castle. Looking around, we can eventually find this house in the corner over here, which is Paul's house. Entering it, we find Paul, who is more than happy to see us. Asking him about the secret doors, he confidently tells us that he is our man for secret doors in the castle. He asks what we are looking for in the secret chamber, and when we mention it is a white mask, he loses interest in keeping it secret immediately as the mask doesn't sound valuable. He then tells us that the door is to the far right corner of the throne in the audience chamber. Following his directions, we come across an ordinary wall. Reciting the incantation that Hilda told us earlier, a secret door then opens. Going along the secret passage, we will eventually find ourselves below the castle. Remnants of the Empire's monsters remain from when they controlled the castle. They were probably put there to make sure that all parts of the castle were monitored. Also, just a bit of a warning, there are monsters in the cave that can turn your party into stone with certain attacks, especially the Rayos. Make sure to have some golden needles ready because if the entire party turns to stone, it's game over as they don't revert back unless cured using Persona or the golden needle. Fighting through the monsters and going deeper, the party eventually finds a white mask in a chest. Also, earlier in the game, I was completely clueless on what to do when finding the goddess's bell, and eventually ended up at the village of Mysidia. But based on how the game provides subtle clues in the form of talking to villagers, the player can eventually find Mysidia. Heading to Mysidia, it lives up to its name, where it is the land of magic, where the only residents are mages. Speaking to them, they'll agree that it is time to break the seal on the ultimate tomb and won't stop us. They will then tell us that once we collect the 2 masks, we will need to travel to a cave somewhere on the continent to retrieve the crystal rod, the artifact that will allow us to enter the tower. Another mage also mentions that there is a small island that lies in the middle of the sea containing the black mask, the counterpart of the white mask. Fortunately for us, when we were doing a bit of exploring earlier, we already visited the tropical islands and found it in a chest. Further speaking to the other mages, one mentions Minwu and confirms that he has passed through the area on his way to the Mysidian tower. Entering the staircase over here in the center of town, we can find a statue. Interacting with it, we can place a white mask on it, and that's it as far as I know. To be honest, I was unsure where to go next, but I decided to explore around and eventually found that placing the white mask opens a cave of Mysidia, which is right over here. Delving deep into this cave should lead us to the crystal rod. Going deeper, the party will eventually be blocked by a doppelganger that is disguised as Flareon and is staring at us. Interacting with it, it reads that the purity of Flareon's heart is stifling the defiled heart of the creature. Placing the black mask on it, the doppelganger then disappears. Eventually going deeper and reaching the bottom, the party then finds 3 chests. 2 of them contain spell tombs and 1 contains the crystal rod, the purpose of us entering the cave. The party now has everything they need to enter the Mysidian tower and find Minwu. As the party sails there, all of a sudden the sky turns dark, and suddenly a whirlpool forms in the sea, swallowing both the ship and the party whole. Upon awakening, the party realizes they've been swallowed by the Leviathan, and to make matters worse, Layla is nowhere to be found. Agreeing in urgency, the party hurriedly tries to make their way out. And when traveling through the stomach, the lava floors from Final Fantasy I return, where when stepped on deal a minor amount of damage to the party for each step. Eventually, you'll enter a crevice and find other survivors. But before you can fully explore this area, your path is blocked by a man named Ricard, who is wearing an armor that is unfamiliar to what we have seen up until now. He greets us and asks who the party is. Asking him about the Dragoons, he reveals that he is in fact the Dragoon and is shocked to find out that the Dragoons and Wyverns have all been wiped out, implying that he has been there for some time. Then showing him the crystal rod, he realizes that the party came for the ultimate tomb and got swallowed up. He tells us that he has been also looking for it, and since they are looking for the same thing, it would be better for them to join up. He then tells us of a boat ahead being guarded by a monster, saying that now that we have teamed up, we might be able to defeat it and leave. But before we go to face the monster, we are open to exploring this area, as I doubt we will be coming back anytime soon. Speaking to one of the survivors, one of them blames an old man and his crystal rod for being the reason why they were swallowed up by the Leviathan, probably inferring that when Minwu passed by, the survivors were collateral damage. A wizard mentions that the Leviathan is the beast that protects the seal of the tower, swallowing anyone with the crystal rod, showing us the one that he has as well, implying that there were many people who were seeking the ultimate tomb before Minwu, and have all befallen the same fate of being swallowed up by the Leviathan. One of the survivors also mentioned that he has been stuck in the Leviathan for 10 years and has given up on escaping. Asking around, we can also find why it's so hard to escape. When the Leviathan opens its mouth, it provides an opportunity to escape, but due to the number of monsters on the way, it makes it quite difficult. Eventually reaching the ship, our party is blocked by a giant worm-like monster called a roundworm. This fight isn't too bad because all you have to do is beat it and move on. So defeating the roundworm, we can then board the ship and be suddenly brought back to the overworld where we were swallowed by the Leviathan initially. But before we head to the tower, if you go with Ricard back to Castle Deist, you can trigger a special cutscene with the son and the mother. They will immediately recognize him and be surprised about his survival. He reveals the mother's name to be Eleanor and asks where her husband Philip was, as well as the other dragoons, trying to confirm if they have really been killed. Eleanor then recounts a story, barely able to contain her emotions. Ricard then tells her to be strong and says he'll come back, asking her and Cain, her son, to look after Deist. Then speaking to Cain, he is surprised to see a dragoon, and Ricard then tells him that he is the last of them, and that he was good friends with his father Philip. He then tells Cain that he wants to avenge the dragoons, and once he is done will train Cain to be the best dragoon there ever was. Cain, unsure how to respond, says thank you and wishes Ricard and good luck at getting the Emperor. Leaving Deist and heading to the Mysidian Tower, we can then interact with the door using the crystal rod, which will then cause a cutscene to play where the barrier is lifted, giving off a brilliant light as it does so. Entering the Mysidian Tower, we'll have to go through multiple floors until we reach the Ultimate Tomb and find Minwu. There are multiple mini-bosses to fight through each level, each representing a different element, which are wind, thunder, water, and fire. When passing through the fire section, you will literally have to swim through lava, which I don't exactly know how it is possible, but it's a game, so I'll allow it. You will then also have to pass through these ice shard floors, which behave similarly to the ones in Final Fantasy 1, where it just takes a tiny bite out of your life for each step. Reaching the top of the tower, we will eventually come across Minwu. He tells us that he has been waiting for us, as the magic sealing access to the Ultimate Tomb is extremely strong, and that he will need to use all of his power on it, causing Maria to look at Firion in worry. Then telling everyone to stand back, he then unleashes a powerful stream of magic on the barrier sealing the door, which is enough to break it. The room then becomes silent. Having expended all his mana, he takes a few steps back before collapsing. The party then rushes towards him, and with his final breath, Minwu tells him to get the Ultimate Tomb and not to grieve, as he is fulfilling his destiny. In shock, Firion shouts for Minwu one last time before he perishes. What's interesting in this scene is that Firion seems to have taken Minwu's death the hardest, indicating that he was close with Minwu. He may have also felt some sadness as he was unable to save the person who have saved the party at the beginning of the game, only being able to watch as he passes away. But Minwu's passing further strengthens their motivation for stopping the Empire, because even though Minwu knew that his death was coming, he did not waver and sacrifice himself for the greater good, imparting to Firion the knowledge of what one must burden to save the world. Entering the unsealed room, there are 5 orbs, with 4 being grey while 1 is yellow. The yellow orb is the Ultimate Tomb. Although weak at the beginning, as the party levels it up, it becomes increasingly more powerful. The other orbs are purely for increasing the stats of all party members, where the 4 orbs increase the party's agility, strength, spirit, and intelligence. When returning to Castle Finn with the Ultima, we can then see that a cyclone has appeared right behind the castle. Entering the castle and going to the audience chamber, we find that Layla has survived the whirlpool and is standing right next to Hilda. Speaking to her, she mentions that when the storm picked up, she got separated from us and thought we died, being glad that she was in the wrong. Then speaking to Hilda, she says that the Emperor has sent a cyclone to destroy Finn, recounting all the cities that was destroyed by the Emperor. Asking her then about wyverns, she'll mention that long ago they used to summon them by reflecting the light of the pendant on the castle's mirror. Speaking then to Gordon, he says that the cyclone will kill them before they even have a chance to use the ultimate magic, making it pointless. Asking about the cyclones, he says that unless we grow wings and learn to fly, we won't be able to get into it. This, alongside the princess's word, hints to us about summoning the wyverns, giving us our next step. We first need to find the mirror, and then use it with the pendant to summon a wyvern. Looking around the castle, we'll eventually find a large mirror. Interacting with it using the pendant, the mirror will absorb the light of the pendant, and will then show us a wyvern egg. This is the same wyvern egg that we submerged into the Spring of Life earlier. The egg then transforms into a wyvern, and a message appears telling us that the egg has hatched and is on its way to Finn. It then cuts to the wyvern approaching the castle, landing a favorite card, after which it then flies off and enters the cyclone. Before we continue with the story, I want to take a quick pause here to discuss the Emperor. Although we barely have any scenes with the Emperor, we do get a look at his tactfulness and power in the few scenes he's in, as well as the ones he's involved in. Throughout the game, the Emperor has taken actions that would lead to success during his conquest. From my assumptions, it's believed that he only began his conquest out of getting some sort of edge over the current forces in the world before beginning his reign. He also made sure that during his conquest that he targeted those that would pose the biggest threat to his plan for world domination. For example, when kidnapping the princess, he was aware of Firion and his party, leading to him losing territory and critical points, and knew that if he eliminated them, that the rebel army would be significantly weaker. He also knew that the party were inexperienced enough to fall for a simple trap that he laid out, and were probably under the assumption that the Emperor wouldn't focus on small fry like them, taking full advantage of that. Another example of this is with the Dragoon. Based on how he nearly eliminated all of them, save for Ricard, he must have believed that they may present a significant risk to his domination. And to ensure no future problems came from that, he also made sure to control the narrative regarding the genocide of the Dragoons. As when Gordon mentions it, he mentions that at the time of the attack, they were under the impression it was a minor skirmish, but in reality, it was quite serious. Even though I mentioned him a lot, and he wasn't very present in the story, this misrepresentation of the severity may have been caused by Borgin when he was accounting Finn. He may have had some power to prevent the messengers from giving the real story, ensuring that no reinforcements were sent to Deist. Although the Emperor wasn't fond of General Borgin, he was tactful with these pieces, making sure that they are only taken off of the board when they were no longer useful. Even when we see General Borgin later, he was desperately trying to retrieve the Goddess's Bell, knowing that he was no longer of any use to the Empire. Because how I see it is that if you recruit someone who betrayed their previous team for materialistic and selfish reasons, it's only a matter of time before they betray you, because something better has come along. Another thing we can also take a look at is the Emperor's appearance, where he has demonic horns and purple skin, almost as if he was between human and monster, showing that the Emperor will resort to anything as long as the end justifies the means, as it looks like for him to attain power he had to give up some form of his humanity. He would also resort to cruel methods like poisoning the wyverns and nearly causing them to go extinct, and would murder anyone and destroy everything with the dreadnought, all for the sake of his world conquest. Returning now back to the story, after the wyvern flies in, if you go towards a cyclone, it will then continuously grow larger and then you'll be teleported inside. But before going any further, I suggest returning to Paul. Speaking to him and mentioning that we plan on going into the cyclone, he calls it an insane idea, but to make sure we are ready as can be, he tells us about the stash hidden near his bed and offers them to us. Following his instructions and feeling along the walls, the party eventually finds his secret stash. Looting them, you'll find some great items, including the blood sword. This is one of the most broken weapons that I've ever seen in a game, as when it hits an enemy, each hit is equal to 1/16 of the enemy's life. And to add the cherry on top, you heal the amount of damage you deal. Although I wouldn't recommend using this weapon against the undead, as it actually does a reverse, where it damages you and heals them instead. Returning then to the cyclone and going deeper and reaching the 7th floor, we come again face to face with the Emperor, but unlike last time, it isn't an illusion. He cruelly mocks the party, calling them insects that aren't even worth being crushed by his foot. He then sends forth some of his minions to attack us. Defeating them, the party then gets slightly closer to him. He then acknowledges our skill and then sends more monsters our way. Defeating the next round of monsters, he then admits that he severely underestimated the party, stating that they should be honored as he will kill them personally. We then enter a fight with the Emperor, but his minions are on the way, and you will need to defeat them before fighting the Emperor himself. The Emperor will cast buff to heal the minions, and the minions' attacks can cause status effects such as poison and sleep, so be careful of that. And surprisingly enough, defeating the Emperor himself after all his minions are gone isn't too difficult. After defeating the Emperor, he will be on his throne, shocked at his defeat. With his final breath, he will then shout that he refuses to die before collapsing, ending the Empire. After the Emperor's defeat, the party then immediately heads back to Castle Finn. Hilda then thanks us for defeating the Emperor, telling us that we have saved the world, and tales of our bravery will be passed down for generations. She then immediately declares that it's time for celebration, and that many have gathered to catch a glimpse of the heroes that have saved the world. A dance scene then plays out, which is something I really didn't expect to happen, where it shows Firin and Maria and Hilda and Gordon dancing in celebration. A soldier then runs in, interrupting the celebrations, telling us that the Dark Knight has declared himself the Emperor. But what's more significant is that the soldier mentions the Dark Knight's name, Leon, the missing member of the party from the beginning and Maria's older brother. The soldier elaborates that he has reorganized the Palamecian Empire and is planning to send the troops to slaughter everyone. The soldier then collapses and dies, from what we can gather are wounds when trying to escape from Leon's forces. After the cutscene ends, we can speak to Hilda. She'll be in shock and confusion, wondering why Maria's brother was the Dark Knight. Maria, also shocked by the revelation, tells Hilda that she will try to reason with her brother, believing he is under the spell of the Emperor. Hilda then goes on and mentions that the only place he can be is in Palamecia. Inquiring further about the place, she tells us that it is a fortress situated high in the mountains and cannot be approached on foot, insinuating that we'll either need the airship or the wyvern to reach it. Before leaving, Gordon recommends speaking to Paul, as he says that there is no place he hasn't been able to break into. When entering Paul's home, we can immediately go see Sid standing alone in one of the rooms. Speaking to him, you find out that he was caught and severely wounded by the cyclone when it passed by Paloon. He slowly climbs into the bed as standing is causing him pain. Guy, worried for Sid, asks if he is okay. Sid brushes it off and says that he is a mess, but says that even though he was caught in the cyclone, the airship was unharmed and he is willing to lend it to the party. With his final breath, he tells us that he is only lending it to us and wants it back, closing his eyes one last time before passing peacefully. The party, witnessing his death, are quiet as they have witnessed someone else close to them perish in such a short time span. Speaking to Paul, he tells us that Sid was planning to give the airship to us once his time has come. He then tells us that we were important to Sid, so much so that he loved the ship with all his heart and gave it to us, emphasizing how much we meant to him. Asking Paul about Palamecia, he mentions that he used a kite to sneak onto the castle roof once, as the only way to get into it is from above. He then heavily suggests that we use the airship that Sid has given us to get onto it. Leaving Finn and heading to the overworld map, the camera then pans to what used to be Paloom, where the airship waits for us. Using Layla's pirate ship, we can reach Paloom and enter the airship, allowing us to travel anywhere we want to using it. It behaves similarly to the airship from Final Fantasy 1, where you can only land on certain areas and are able to move around the map quite quickly. Before heading to Palamecia, you can explore the world as well. You'll find locations that you could previously visit like Gatria, Paloom and others inaccessible, probably because they were destroyed by the cyclone and there's barely anything left to see. Using the airship, we can then enter Castle Palamecia. To be honest, there isn't really anything interesting on your way to Leon. The only thing I would say that was interesting was that you do fight enemies that look awfully similar to the Emperor called Imperial Shadows. Like the Emperor, these enemies mainly focus on using magic to debuff and damage your party. Reaching the throne room, you find Leon sitting on the throne, waiting for you. As Leon and Firion get ready to fight, Maria steps in between the both of them, stopping them, asking why Leon is insistent on fighting. He then says those are weak words from the weak, saying power is what rules the world, declaring the throne for himself and that the strong control the weak, as the weak cannot survive without them. He then brings up the rebels' lives that were lost opposing the Empire. But before he can continue with the supervillain monologue, he's interrupted as the castle begins shaking. The group then face the throne to see an otherworldly being entering the throne room from a portal. It's the Emperor, returned in an even more inhumane form, scolding Leon and telling him that delusions of grandeur did not fit him, finding the idea of him becoming ruler amusing even. He then declares that the only emperor in the world is him and gets ready to wipe out everyone in the room. Leon, in shock that the emperor survived, said that he isn't planning to hand over the empire after taking control of it. The resurrected emperor then laughs, stating that he has no need for the empire as he will destroy the world with the powers he has gained through hell, and that we will be the first to fall to it. In a desperate attempt, Rickard runs to hold off the emperor, telling the party to call in the Wyvern to allow them to escape. He stands in front of the emperor, challenging him as he declares proudly that he is Rickard Highwind, last of the dragoons. Before the party can respond, the Wyvern swoops in and grabs him as it escapes the castle, leaving Rickard to face the Emperor alone. Suddenly, columns of light come from the ground, then a large explosion occurs, decimating the castle. But in its place arises a large mass of crystals in the shape of a castle. The party then returns to Castle Finn, and Hilda runs towards us, asking what happened. She then notices that Leon, who has taken off the Dark Knight armor, presents with him. She then looks around, probably searching for Rickard. When she can't find him, she realizes what may have happened and asks for an explanation. Firion then, without any sugarcoating, tells her that the Emperor has risen from hell. Maria, in anguish, then also tells Hilda that Rickard has fallen, and then begins to name all that have passed in their war against the Empire, with all of the deaths taking a toll on her and her not knowing how much more she can handle. Leon then coolly interjects, saying that as long as the Emperor remains, more lives shall be lost. Firion then asks if Leon can join the rebels. After a bit of hesitation, Hilda allows it. Maria then asks her brother to join with him to take down the Emperor. Looking at Maria and Firion, he then agrees to help. Speaking to Hilda again after the cutscene, she mentions that when the monsters came to the world, they used the Jade Passage. Inquiring further about this, she mentions that there is a place in Mysidia of the same name. Then speaking to Gordon, he tells us that the castle that appeared at the same time of the Emperor's resurrection is called Pandemonium, the fortress of the Lord of Hell. Then asking him about the Jade Passage, he mentions that in Kashwan Fairy Tales and Myths, there's a small lake in Mysidia, taking all that enter the lake to hell. Leaving the castle again, the camera then pans to a small lake, the one we'll need to take to head to Pandemonium. But before heading there, we can make a quick pit stop at Castle Deist to tell Eleanor and Kane about Rickard's fate. Speaking to Eleanor, she is saddened to hear that Rickard has passed, stating that he was a noble dragoon and was pleased to go out in the name of honor, struggling to get the words out. Asking about the dragoons, she tells the party that she plans to leave Deist with Kane and find a new place to live, as the castle has too many painful memories for her to stay. But before she leaves, she thanks us for saving the Wyvern egg and letting us speak to Rickard one last time. As a thank you, she awards you the Excalibur, the most prized treasure of the dragoons and the strongest sword from the previous game. Leaving Deist and heading for the lake, we are suddenly teleported to an underground cave where it shows a special animation of us being teleported there. Something unique to only this location. There isn't anything too special as you pass through the Jade Passage, however there is a mage hiding behind this waterfall. Going behind it and speaking to him, he will study some pretty powerful and useful spells, including the Flare spell which deals combustion damage. Continuing on our way, we will reach this teleporter which will teleport us directly to Pandemonium. We finally arrive at Pandemonium, a location unlike anything we have seen before, where the walls and floor are made of a crystalline-like substance. And to emphasize the feeling of this palace, the background music of this evokes a powerful sense of grandeur and power, giving us the feeling of moving towards an epic battle that will decide the fate of the world. This area has some of the most dangerous monsters, including the Kowal and Lamias. The Kowals often appear with Lamias or Lamia queens and have their normal attacks that can inflict instant death, defeating one of your party members instantly. The Kowals can also use this move called Blaster X, which can instantly inflict stun on your party as well. Then making it to the 10th floor, you will then come face to face with the resurrected Emperor, commending us for braving the bowels of hell just to reach him. He then declares that the hand of man, which deals in false justice and forsaken love, can never hope to defeat him, the Lord Master of Hell. After he says this, we then enter a battle with him. We are now face to face with the Emperor, who is an overwhelming being with a menacing aura. His sheer size dwarfs our party and his menacing figure. And now you're probably expecting me to say something about him being stronger than Chaos from Final Fantasy 1, but I picked up the Blood Sword earlier, an overpowered broken weapon. This was the entire fight for me. So yeah, GG. But jokes aside, without the blood sword, he is a terrifying enemy, having 15,000 HP and using the most powerful spells in the game, except for the ultimate magic, as there's only one tool for it. But yeah, having the blood sword just makes this fight so trivial that I was even like, wait, what just happened after the fight? But anyway, after that, upon his defeat, he's in shock to be defeated by those he considered insects twice, suddenly then asking us who we are. He then suddenly disappears in the portal that brought him to us. Proclaiming victory and avenging those who died fighting the Empire, the party returns to Castle Finn victorious. Before reaching Hilda, Leon moves off to the side to stand away from the party. The princess now tells us that she is happy that the struggle is finally over, and that with the Emperor gone, they don't have to live in fear anymore, and thanks us. Gordon then says that with the combined strength of Cashwan and Finn, the kingdom can be rebuilt, telling us that he will help rebuild the kingdom with the princess, and that once he stood there a coward, but is standing here as a new man and thanks us for helping him change, and tells us that Scott is smiling down on us from above. Paul then comes to us, telling us we have put him out of a job as they have gotten rid of the Empire, his primary target. To make up for this, he is then planning to steal from us and tells us we should watch our backs. But as he leaves, he stops and takes one last look before continuing. Layla then comes to us and praises Firion. As she hints at Firion joining a pirate crew, she notices that Maria is uncomfortable with the idea, and says that he should watch out as his next battle has already begun. Similar to Paul, she looks back before leaving, probably going to miss the adventures that they had fighting the Empire together. Surprisingly, Nelly comes to congratulate us as well, telling the party that they did right by her father and that she's going to be living in Finn from now, directly serving the princess, as she wants to help out in any way she can. Firion then sees an image of Joseph standing behind Nelly, before she goes and stands next to Hilda and Gordon. Hilo then tells the party that they will now dedicate themselves to gaining what they have lost, bidding us farewell and again giving us their gratitude. They then leave, leaving the party alone with Leon, who stands away from the party. Guy finally speaks, saying he is happy the war is finally over, and Maria saying they can finally live in peace again. Maria then looks and asks if Leon will be able to join them, and that not everybody is able to go back. Maria, confused, asks why, and as Leon begins to walk away, she begs Firion to stop him. But both Guy and Firion look down in understanding as Leon walks away. Firion then speaks and says that Leon is right. They have been through too much and he can't stop him, especially not now. Firion doesn't say goodbye to Leon but instead says they will meet again, hopeful that Leon and him will be able to speak again. As the main trio leave, they stop and look back, seeing the spirits of Minru, Ricard, Sid, and Joseph appear. Then the spirits disappear one by one. The party then looks at Firion, who then takes a deep breath and lifts his arm, declaring that it's time to set off, leaving Castle Finn to set off on their next adventure, and the screen then fades to black. As the game ends, we get a similar ending scene to that in Final Fantasy I. The screen pans in the Jade Passage entrance and the following is said. Their long struggle was finally at an end. The Emperor, Pandemonium, the monsters plaguing the world, all had vanished without a trace. Peace had returned once more. The wounds of the war would mend, and the memory of those bitter days would fade. But one thing would never be forgotten, that a band of young heroes once saved the world. The ending sequence, in my opinion, gives more closure than the ending sequence in Final Fantasy I, as it gives us more context about what happens after we have defeated the Emperor. It tells us that after the Emperor was defeated, Pandemonium and all the monsters that he brought forth had disappeared without a trace. Additionally, this implies that the Emperor himself was most likely using himself as a channel for the monsters to maintain form in the world, possibly explaining why he had a demonic form, and more likely that the stronger the monsters he wanted to bring out, the more of his humanity he had to sacrifice. Shown in Pandemonium, where some of the strongest monsters appeared, and the Emperor had barely any humanity remaining within himself. It does also give a tiny bit of a bittersweet ending as well with Leon, because it is easy now to forget that Leon was the Dark Knight before. But when he was the Dark Knight, he committed many atrocities, especially with helping the completion of the Dreadnought, which caused many people to lose their lives. And to add on further, if the Emperor didn't stop him, he would have become the Emperor himself, slaughtering everyone that stood in his way and trying to conquer the world. So instead of sweeping it under the rug, he chooses to atone and says he will not let go of it, as too much damage was caused and is probably weighing quite significantly on his conscience.